Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Odyssey, Telegram, Twitter, Twitch, and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is December 11th, 2022, and this is episode 219 of the Workshop Podcast. Tonight, I got a great episode just finished up with a good buddy of mine, Kerry Brown from Strong Roots Resources. This is an oddball, off-the-wall episode. Whenever he comes by, we always have some cool content for you. Tonight, it's all about Art Bell and the legacy that he left behind with Coast to Coast AM. If you're not familiar, do yourself a favor and listen. You're in for a treat tonight. Real quick, I'll get the announcements out of the way. 3 things. I made some changes on the streaming, guys. So, number 1, if you use Rumble, I will now be streaming most of my episodes live on Rumble as well. Been picking up quite a following, quite an audience over there, so I hope you enjoy that. And I figured since, I'm messing around with all kinds of new stuff, decided to start streaming over to Twitter as well, something I don't use very often, but I do have an account over there. So you're going to see me streaming to Twitter as well. Finally, if you didn't know this, for about the last 6 months, I've also been streaming to Twitch. So if you're a Twitch user or that's your preferred method of streaming, I'm over there as well. You can grab all the links to any of this in today's description of the video or the audio, depending on where you are. And finally, of course, can't leave without telling you today's tool. Today's tool is the Forearm forklift. If you haven't seen them, they look like giant orange straps that you wrap around your forearms, and they help you lift things without hurting your back nearly as bad. Love the product. I've stood by the product. Pretty cool. Did a review on these things a couple of years ago. And the CEO of the company reached out to me a couple of months back and sent me a couple of his products to test out. Working on them right now. One that looks like an oversized crazy carpet for pulling furniture around. Just you wait. I like it so far. But anyway, check out the Forearm forklift. Amazon link is in the description today. So tonight, guys, you're in for a treat. Like I said, Kerry and I just finished the episode, and in true Art Bell fashion, we ended up having a signal disruption, which was kind of cool. A little frustrating, but kind of cool. I'll try to edit that out the best I can in the audio. But with that, let's dive into tonight's episode and have a lot of fun, guys. Hey, guys, Toolman Tim here. I am, back or here with Mr. Kerry Brown. How are you, Kerry?
I'm doing great.
We got a good one tonight. I'll do a little intro. I put together a few notes just of what kind of inspired this show. But for those of you out there who don't know who Art Bell is, I don't even know. Would we call it paranormal radio, Kerry? Do you think that would be fair, or what would you call it?
That's the term that's used more commonly these days. I remember Art used to call it, especially once he was on satellite radio, he called it Extra-Terrestrial radio.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That is so good. So we got Renegade Butcher just come up and said, for whom the bell tolls. So a couple quick things I want to get out of the way, guys. First off, if anybody's listening and you're a Twitch user, give me a follow over on Twitch. We've been streaming there for a few months now, and it's growing very slowly. But what's really exciting tonight, just to make sure it's working, is if anybody's on Rumble, and you can let me know, we're officially streaming on Rumble. And I thought, hey, if I'm going to go balls to the wall, we're now streaming on Twitter as well. So it is what it is. We got a Sean Ryan in here, says Art is the GOAT. Yes. Yeah. Art. Anyway, I got to say, I've only really known of Coast to Coast and Art for about a year. But Kerry, you have fond memories of listening to him back in the day, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I found Art when I was working a third shift security job when I was in EMT school. And it was an incredibly boring job, and I was very grateful to find a radio show that kept me engaged and kept me awake for at least 3 or 4 hours of that shift.
So here's the thing. He was big in the 90s and early 2000s. And for those who don't know, his show was called Coast to Coast AM. He started in radio back in the 70s, worked his way up. It was called, I forget what he originally called it, was West Coast AM. And in 93, they renamed it to Coast. And it must have taken some some clout on his part, because originally he broadcast out of a studio in one of the major casinos in Las Vegas. And he went to his bosses, as the story goes, and he said, I'm moving back to my town, which is in Pahrump, Nevada. I'd never heard of it before I started researching art. And he said, I'm going there, and you're going to build me an antenna, and I'm going to broadcast from there. And I guess he had just enough pull with the network execs or whatever that he was able to get away with it. And while he was there, he launched or founded Pahrump radio station, which was called, I had it written down here, KNYE. He called it In the Kingdom of Nye. And the tagline at the time was, things that go Pahrump in the night. And I thought that was kind of cute. So he since sold it to a lady named Karen. I actually reached out to her a while ago, which was so funny. I never heard back, but I'm like, I just sent a friendly email and I said, hey, you don't know me at all, but I would love to have you on the show, because I just love to hear your story, the story of the radio station, and some stories about art, because, it would be really cool. He seemed like he was a guy that publicly kept to himself. He was out there on the radio a lot, but as far as he didn't seem like he had a lot of real close connections and that sort of thing. So it would be neat to hear some stories from behind the scenes, And
sure.
Sean Ryan says he had Dreamland, Midnight in the Desert. Which one? There was one of those was on Sirius for only about 6 weeks. And then
Dark Matter.
Thank you. Boy, see, I'm glad I have Kerry here. So
Useless information.
no, man, this is fun. So for those out there like, what the hell are these guys talking about tonight? First off, it is the Workshop Podcast, which means I named it, and we can talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about, right, Kerry?
Exactly. We got to have some way of entertaining ourselves in the workshop.
Absolutely, yeah. So this evening I don't have a wood fire going, but we're doing good. But so I grew up listening to AM talk radio. I'm not really sure why, but I always had it on, or my dad always had it on. So whenever you go in the shop, he always listened to Talk of the Town on 9:30 a.m. out of St. John, New Brunswick. And there was a guy on there named Tom Young, and it was the first time. Do you ever listen to somebody on the radio for a lot of years, and then you finally see their picture and you're like, yeah, okay. Happened with me with Jack too, right? And so Tom Young, like me, I always say I got a good face for radio, right? And Tom Young had a great face for radio, but he had a great voice for radio. And Dad always used to tell me the story where I grew up on the East Coast. They had the Groundhog Day storm in the mid to late 70s. It was basically a blizzard in February. Nova Scotia is, I want to say, about 100 miles wide. And they had salt spray on the back sides of the trees from the far coast. So we're talking 100 miles across. I mean, telephone poles. Dad's area was out of power for 10 days. Some of the other places, 2-3 weeks. So anyway, he got famous for his coverage there. And I think I picked up some of my libertarian mindset from him, because he was very much open on the idea of limiting government overreach. So I always appreciated that. So that's where it started for me, for sure. Did you ever listen to anything other than art as far as talk radio and that sort of thing goes?
I never had any interest in any of it. And I worked in high school. I worked in a restaurant where there was always like sports talk radio, and I hated it. Now I do remember Dad would play the John Boy and Billy show on the classic rock station when he'd be taking us to school. And that's one of those shows where they still get away with everything, which is kind of great. So I enjoyed those skits, but I could not do political commentary, or I still can't today. So when art came about, it was ideal.
Josh, the Renegade Butcher, said, I wasn't allowed TV for a lot of time as a kid. I had a little crystal AM radio, ran off a 9-volt battery. I'd hide and listen to art on late at night. That is cool. For me, so in the 90s, I was all into paranormal everything. I remember I used to buy these magazines that would be about spontaneous human combustion, aliens, and all of that. And of course, I was a huge X-Files fan. So I really wish I'd have found art back in the day. Were you into that? Did you watch X-Files at all? Or
my heart, Gillian Anderson.
I knew you were going to. I know, me too. Yep.
That's where the redhead thing started, right there. But yeah, I love that show. And Mom likes weird stuff too, so we would watch weird TV shows together of that nature.
I don't know where it came from, because there was no one in my family who did, but man, I digested everything, but there, A&E and different, Discovery had a lot of that weird stuff when I was a kid. So I'd watch it all the time. And Sean said, I meant to mention that. Yeah. So before pre-93, Art basically talked about politics. So here's a question, Kerry. How much do you think that Art talked about? Like, okay, when he had guests on, I feel like he was always very much, he gave everybody their say. He was very open. He didn't judge anyone. But how much of what he covered, or how much of what he brought on there, do you think was either, I hate to use the word staged, but perhaps a little tongue in cheek? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think Art was probably relatively agnostic when it came to believing what the guests and the callers had to say, but he was so good as an interviewer and as a conversation maker.
Yes.
That, he didn't insult people, he didn't, come down hard on anybody, but he would also, like, if you learned his speech patterns, you would catch like his quips and changes in tone and things like that. So yeah, I don't think he was a true believer in anything. I think he was just interested in everything.
And it sounded like it's kind of weird to listen to. I've been listening. I went through and listened to a ton of his Ghost to Ghost episodes. So for those who don't know, every year on Halloween, he would rename the show Ghost to Ghost. And for a lot of years, he would take calls without a screener. And for anybody who doesn't know, of course, a screener is a person who screens the calls to make sure you're not a whack job. And for someone to take live calls like that without a screener is unheard of, even back in the 90s for the most part. Mm-hmm. So he would get the best ghost stories on there every year. Was his show 4 or 5 hours long? I can't remember, but most of these recordings I've listened to are just shy of 4 hours long, and they're entertaining. You'll get the occasional wanderer on there who's like, can't tell a story, and you can tell Art's getting just a little impatient. And so he just, like you said, he had a way of course, he was a slave to commercial breaks, which from what I've read about him, he absolutely hated. Yeah. But he was very good at keeping people in check and in line, keeping his time going, but also giving people, if it was a good story, he would hook them and say, hey, come back after the commercial and I'll keep the person here.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was great. And so he ran the traditional idea of Ghost or Coast to Coast from 93 till I believe it was 2003. And then from then on, it seemed like he retired about every other year, didn't it?
When I was reading through his bio, I think he retired 4 times for a different reason every time. But he just kept coming back, even if it was in a limited capacity to host on the weekends, or he started his own shows on Sirius XM, and then as basically like an internet, podcast style. You could tell like it was just in his blood. He just couldn't stay away from it, even with like family issues and different things that happened.
It was cool. I had, as you know, Bill or William Fortune on there, for the author of 1 Second After. And he said he was live on the air with Art the day that he reported gunshots at his house. So that was the one of the times that he ended up retiring because somebody came by and fired off a gun. And I thought that was a pretty cool story to hear because that's one of those stories everywhere you read about Art, it kind of sticks out and comes up,
Yeah.
But for those out there who want to know more about Art and Coast to Coast and all that he does, pretty much, as Kerry's found too, everything's out there. But I'm a sucker for Reddit. You ever go on Reddit, Kerry, at all or not?
A little bit. I use it a little bit.
So there's a Art Bell subreddit that has, 6 or 8 posts a day with comments all the time on there. I actually posted earlier today because there's a story I wanted to share in here, and I couldn't find it. I didn't get, I got a couple responses, but nobody was quite sure. But it was one of the Ghost to Ghost stories I really enjoyed. And when I get to it, Nate LeMaster, he'll really enjoy it for a certain reason. But we won't say it now because then we'll all have to drink. So I want to read so I picked out a few YouTube comments about his on a couple of the videos we're going to watch, and they just kind of sum up. They're very similar. It seems like at his popularity, they said he was on 500 stations with over 10 million nightly listeners, which today would never happen, of course. They said the new version with George Noory has about 2.5 million listeners. Have you tried listening to him at all?
Not in a long, long time, but I did back in the EMS days, and it's just not the same. It's just not the same format anymore.
Sean says Art believed in Ouija boards, and he wouldn't touch one again or even discuss it. And Art had something for red eyes. He said they creeped him the hell out. And that was something I wanted to mention. Listening to all the Ghost to Ghosts, it seemed like Art really, I couldn't get a feel for his religious beliefs or his afterlife beliefs, but it seemed like he was really searching for what happens after you die. Did you ever catch that? Or
yeah, it was a common theme. He brought on all kinds of people to discuss that topic.
And I wonder if that was a personal thing for him, or if he just got interested in it, or it's weird because we all come at life and death a different way, but it was definitely a common thread that goes through any and all of his episodes, especially with his more more adventurous guests, and of course the Ghost to Ghost episodes.
Oh yeah.
Renegade says he has whiskey for the ham comment for when that comes up later on. So so here I got 3 comments so people can kind of get a feel for it. But it said, I was a trucker. I drove country overnight. This dude, talking about Art, made my life at the time so enjoyable. Listening to his show while driving under starry skies all over the country was an amazing experience. God bless Art Bell and all the great memories. The next one was, I was a deputy sheriff in Miami for 31 years, working the midnight shift for most of those years. Listening to Art Bell was probably the best thing about working midnights. As a deputy sheriff in Miami for 31 years, working the midnight shift for most of those years, I was always listening to Art Bell. And then the last one, this is a good one. This reminded me of Renegade. I remember laying in bed at 1 a.m. as a kid with a tiny radio speaker under my pillow so I could listen to Art Bell. So many memories. And it seems like so many people, I mean, we all talk about nostalgia now anyway, but every time people wax eloquently about Art in the comments or on Reddit or anything, it was always how he helped them pass the time late at night, whether people had insomnia, whether they were truck drivers, EMS, doctors, night stalkers at a grocery store. And I'm going to venture to guess that some of the topics covered on this show were the first time some people ever heard some of this stuff.
It was the first time I heard quite a bit of it. I mean, that's what really, kind of opened my mind up to realizing that the world is a much interesting place than I thought in my early 20s at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, he talked about, what was it? Mental projection. I can't remember what that, being able to take your break. And, here's the thing. Again, we're going to be, at least I'm going to be agnostic about most of this. I may come a little bit more on the realist side as we talk about some of the guests, just because some have more credibility than others. But, Art always had, like you said, an agnostic approach to any of these topics. Whether it was Ouija boards, whether it was life after death, whether it was near-death experiences, aliens, all of that. And Sean Ryan, man, it's good to have you in here, Sean. He said Art spawned a generation of conspiracy theorists. So here's a question. What do you think Art would have thought of the last almost 3 years, Kerry? I was thinking that's what was running through my head the whole time I was prepping for this show. I
would love to know. I mean, you get asked the question, if you could talk to any person living or dead, I think it might be Art Bell. So I read, or I listened to most of a show that was the day after 9/11. And of course, at that time, we didn't know a lot. Right. And there's still a variety of opinions on what really went down and why that day. But I didn't pick up on any that Art suspected anything other than the official report.
Okay.
But later on down the line, many, many years later, you find that he's questioning things. So he might have, bought the official version of things early on. But I would think he was, he's pretty discerning. So I would think maybe at some point, at least after a year or so, Art would have been like, "This is kind of weird. let's let's dig a little deeper into what we're being told here." I would hope that, because he was definitely a researcher and he put in his time on that.
Most definitely. Where do you think I've the one thing I've struggled with, and I think it's because he was so damn agnostic with beliefs. Where did his politics fall, do you believe?
I want to say at one point he described himself as like a libertarian or like a conservative libertarian.
Okay.
And there's also I am not 100% on this. This could have been a comment that I read, but he seemed to have kind of like a live and let live attitude. Like,
right.
He didn't seem to get all that tore up over what people did in the privacy of their own homes and lives. So,
and it's hard because when you look back on somebody like that, at least me personally, I sometimes subconsciously read my own beliefs into what he talks about, So of course you hear the things that mesh with you. So it's good to talk to somebody else about that, because I really did get a libertarian bent from him, but I thought it would be nice to hear for sure, because I listened to an episode a while back that he did on, I think it was the Montana militiamen, and they were, like Freeman, that kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
And he was very negative toward them. Whereas some of the other, like Ruby Ridge, especially, he talked about where he wasn't so negative on the Ruby Ridge incident. So it was interesting because he would take it on a case-by-case basis as well, where he would judge people, I think, based on their intentions as well.
Yeah.
And Sean said Art wrote a book called The Quickening that predicted a lot of the current events. He used that idea. I heard him talk about it quite often, and I think he might have been a little ahead of his time with it, but I think it's kind of happening.
He did. And I read that book about a decade ago, and then I revisited it maybe a month or two back. And it will give you chills. The guy understood trends, and there's a lot of like futurists and people of that nature. And I think because he curated information from so many different sources and paid attention and didn't just like judge outright, just took in the information, he was onto a lot of stuff. And I recommend picking up a copy and taking a look, because you'll kind of be like, whoa, that's he made better and more accurate predictions than most people he had on the show who were there to make predictions.
I was thinking that exact thing when you were just talking about that. So.
Yeah.
So I was in researching for the show tonight. I read that. So we're going to talk about one of the more famous call-ins, an Area 51 tie-in. So for the record, 3 months ago was the 25th anniversary of that call. So I thought that was kind of cool, and also crazy how fast time travels. Hey,
no kidding.
Speaking of time travel, and we'll get to that too tonight. So I think.
Oh yeah, my favorite.
All right, so I'm gonna mention a couple quick things here, guys. Okay. I don't know how well this is going to work. I know you'll be able to hear the audio. I don't think we'll get shut down for playing any audio. We're going to talk about it as it plays, probably about 2 minutes per clip. I may get a copyright strike after the fact, but I don't imagine we'll have any issues live. But if by some weird coincidence it does, there's lots of other feeds you can go on for it. But I think we'll be fine. So I've done this before, never had any issues, but just throwing it out there for everybody in case something does happen, like a famous broadcast interruption, right, Kerry?
Right, yeah.
All right, so here we go. So this, I don't know if this would be Art's most famous call, but between this one, I would say this would be the one that's probably made it over into popular culture the most. Hey, Kerry?
Mel's Hole is all over the place. You can just search that and not even throw in Art Bell or Coast to Coast in your search, and you're going to find
it has
hundreds of articles. And
has its own goddamn Wikipedia page, so that tells you something.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play just a little bit. If people out there have never heard this before, I hope it comes through nice and clear. I don't want to spoil it, so let's just play. I'm going to play about 2 minutes of it, and then we'll talk. Feel free to talk anytime you want to, Kerry.
The bottomless pit in Washington. Mel's Hole. The bottomless.
Quite elderly. And
Let's go back. Sorry, guys. A
For
little.
this hole?
well, the hole has always been there. We've been out there for a couple of years now, and you know, the hole has been there since we've been there. It's been there since the previous owner was there, and the previous owner there was quite elderly, and I'd say he was there for a good 30, 40 years before we moved in.
Wow.
And then
And so there's been a thing of throwing stuff down this hole for a
long
time.
It's been going on, you know, for as long as the hole has been there, I assume.
When nobody knows that, I guess. All right. How do you pronounce the name of your town? Manastash?
Monastash.
Right.
So I'm going to pause it there for a minute. So we'll fill you in a little bit on the background. So the name Mel's Hole sounds really funny nowadays, of course, but it, so Mel lives where a place, okay. Yeah. He said, perfect. Renegade said the audio is good. So Mel's Hole is basically a hole in the ground that not everybody knew where it was. Apparently the local community did. Apparently it was, would you say bottomless, Kerry, or pretty damn close?
Yeah, he said he ran something like 80,000 feet of fishing line down into it and still couldn't find the bottom. So there is that. And I'm checking my notes here.
Yep.
I think this was supposedly in Washington State.
That's right. Yes. Okay. Yep.
And so he called that clip that you brought up is the first time he called in to Art. He called in several times over the years. And one of the stories that Mel described was that his neighbor threw a deceased dog into the hole.
Right.
And Mel later saw the dog alive.
A la Pet Cemetery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And apparently the locals used it as a garbage hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. Literally anybody would walk up and throw things in. And of course, they never had to deal with it. And we're also going to talk about another famous hole a little later on. I don't think Kerry knows about this one. So this one would far, if you guys have ever heard about the world's deepest hole in Siberia, if you believe what Mel said, this would be not infinitely, but way, way deeper than what anybody had ever dug or drilled or anything. So there was a lady I heard on one of the Ghost to Ghost episodes who supposedly lived in northern Ontario, and she had a hole like that as well. So lots of people, Renegade Butcher says Tim knows about a hole that Kerry's never heard of. So that's good. Got to leave it to Josh to bring those. Yeah, every single time.
Every time.
Okay, so if you listen, I hate to be the guy who, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Kerry, because
all right.
Mel's Hole, this entire, and I think Art got a lot of traction with this story, but when you listen to it, boy, it's, you can hear the guy laughing at times, like chuckling to himself, eh?
Yes.
Did you notice that as well?
Yes, especially on like a second or a third listen, because the first time I heard this story was it was on a CD. I signed up for the print newsletter that Coast to Coast had back in the day.
Wow.
And with your first, I wish I still had those because there's probably not very many out there. Most people probably threw them away. It was called After Dark, the After Dark newsletter. Okay. They sent with your first issue, they sent a CD and it had the story of Mel's Hole I think that was like one portion of it. And on that first listen, I just bought it. Like here, I have this thing where I tend to believe, I want to say, I don't disbelieve things I hear. I give everything a fair shake upon first listen, and then I will go back and I will apply my BS filter after the fact. And yes, you can hear him that it's starting to sound a little bit like a crank call, especially on some of the later ones where he's called in, 2 or 3 years later.
A crank call, or maybe now I wish I could pick somebody's brain who really knew Art, but it almost feels like the two of them were in on it together. What do you think? Yeah.
There's a rumor that Art would plan this out with some of his radio buddies. And people he spoke with on the ham, and everybody take a drink now. And
there you go.
And they would create these characters because it made good storytelling, and ultimately Art was a storyteller. So I have no problem with that. It was entertainment.
So, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like I said, we talked a few minutes ago about like how much of this was real and how much was staged. But here's the thing. Does it really matter? Like that, I mean, I don't know. It was entertaining. It kind of at times smacks of War of the Worlds. When was that? In the 30s when War of the Worlds played on the radio and everybody thought it was real?
Yep. So
it was entertaining. Some of it is so almost satirical that you'd think, how would anyone believe it? And then lots of it is, and I think tons of people who called in were absolutely genuine and were telling stories to the best of how they remembered it. And I love hearing about this stuff, but when you listen to Mel's Hole, and it's the most famous one to start with, so it's fun, but and Sean Ryan says they said the same about some of JC Weber's calls as well.
Oh, I can't wait to get to him. Yeah.
So it's okay. Like that's what's cool about it is, if it was theater, it was good theater. And if it was fun, it was spontaneous, it was good spontaneity. And I watched a video recently about some of the early UFC fights, and they said possibly some of them were rigged or fixed. Now, whatever, wherever you land on the thing, it doesn't matter. But what they said was that it would only be fixed on one side of the match. So the guy who lost knew he was going to lose, but the guy who won didn't know the other guy was going to lose. So there was only one person in it that actually knew. So I thought that was kind of plausible deniability,
Yeah, and with the way these stories are being spun on the show, there's no harm being done.
No.
This isn't like yelling fire in a crowded theater or something like that. It's just all in good fun. And if people choose not to practice discernment and believe things that are a little out there, well, then that's on them.
Boy, sometimes Josh comes out with a real gem. I don't want his head to get too big, but Renegade Butcher says it was like campfire ghost stories made into a radio show.
That's what it felt like every night, and it felt like a conversation.
I'm glad you came on here, Kerry, because you have the real-time memories of him. And I think that's cool. I like how you can interject that kind of stuff. So I brought up, there was a few things in the Mel's Hole article and that sort of thing, but said local news reporters who investigated the claims found no public records of anybody named Mel Waters ever residing in or owning property in Kittias County.
Right.
Yeah, and this was quite funny. So State Department of Natural Resources said the hole does not exist and geologically it's impossible. No shit, Sherlock. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember Mel said that like you would throw something down it and you wouldn't hear anything
ever.
And if it was thousands of feet deep, at some point that sound would reverberate back up out the hole. It might take a little bit, but I just can't see how a hole could be a completely straight shaft where, because any other object, if it's like they said, geologically, there's got to be some kind of curvature or zigzag or something. But it still made a great story and great entertainment.
Oh, I was out blowing snow one day and I listened to it for the first time and I'm like, this is rather enthralling. I can see how mid-90s radio listeners would have been like, this is something else.
Yeah, back in a time when we weren't absolutely inundated with, a million podcasts to choose from and all this stuff, like this would have been entertainment gold.
Renegade says Mel's Hole was an analogy for the U.S. dollar. That's good.
Yep.
He's on a roll tonight. So the next one we're going to talk about is JC. And for the record, this dude called in at least 30 times over a 19-year span. And I put in parentheses, possibly the original troll. That's what I put there for my thoughts. So let's play maybe a minute or two of this, and we'll see where we end up. Hang on. Let's bring it up first before we do that. There we go.
The crack of thunder. Back into the night we go. West of the Rockies, you're on the...
Oh, wow. We're going to get
this thing on.
We're going to get an ad here, guys.
Hey, I want to show
Sorry
you
about
something
that.
real
That
quick.
is
When you're only going
hilarious.
Yeah, good morning.
Yes, first of all, I want to say that this Atlantis business,
Yes.
this is all the devil's deception. It is being propagated and perpetrated by people like you.
Wait a minute,
in the
what?
media.
Wait a
and this
minute.
is why I am against media pornography.
Wait.
The pornographization
Wait.
of the media.
Wait.
And what?
Wait. Let's have an adult discussion about this.
First
Now,
of all,
look,
you
if
science... Go insulting me again.
No, I'm not insulting. I'm trying to have a dialogue with you.
Every time I talk to you, it's insultation from you.
Oh, insultation?
You've never
Let me
allowed
tell
me
you
to
something.
even have
I could
my say.
never do
Say
half
my
the
point.
job on you that you do on yourself. Now, listen to me for just one moment. Would you please?
I'm listening.
All right, good. If science finds through the method science uses, which includes video cameras and all the rest of it, that there really is a city below the waters in Cuba, and yesterday we got evidence that indeed there is.
I'll tell you what they're doing.
What? What?
The same pornographers that are creating that Star Trek are doing this as special
Pornographers?
effects. This is
Pornographers did not create Star Trek.
Yes,
Why
it
would
is. Haven't you ever
Star
seen
Trek
that
is
show?
one of my favorite programs.
It's pornographic. It's pornographic.
Star Trek?
Yes.
Star Trek is an icon of American science fiction. It is.
It is part of the media pornography that is assaulting our nation. Star Trek is just among. It's terrible. If you've ever seen that show with that 69 or whatever.
There we go. So,
Oh boy.
go ahead, Kerry. You start.
Well, so this guy has his own fandom entry on the Coast to Coast fandom site. Jonathan Christian Webster. I want to give him proper credit. Probably another invention of one of somebody, and it brilliantly done. I mean, just fantastic.
Sounds like a Simpsons character.
He does, and I think they might have taken like Ned Flanders and crossed him with something of the sort, like Ned on like he's on Speed or something like that. But yeah, he represented Clamp, which was the Christian Legion against media pornography.
Oh,
And that was his thing. And let's just say for a minute, this is a real guy, because I have met these kind of people before.
as
Maybe
have
not
I.
quite that intense, but pretty close. And
There-
to Art's
read Nate's
credit,
comment. Yep.
yep, to Art's credit, like he still managed. Like anybody else would have just hung up on the guy.
Yes.
But Art knew it was good radio, and so he fed it, and it was epic.
He what does John Willis say? Don't feed the trolls. So I think Art knew how to just give him enough, enough breadcrumbs to hang himself and have fun with it. But rarely did Art ever get as upset as he sounds there. And it could be totally, it could be put on, but he rarely ever spoke over a guest. And I really appreciated that because, but this was fun because you could tell as soon as JC comes on, you could hear it in Art's voice. And you're like, no.
Yeah.
And I have met people like him. And I really think, I know Art only passed, what's it been, 5 or 6 years now? Maybe 2018. Yeah, 2018. But he was kind of, he was still doing his show, but I think he would have had a lot of fun with people, even, the last 3 or 4 years, some of the crazy crackpots that have just come right out of left field. I think he would have had a lot of fun with a lot of them.
Yep.
Byron says, don't argue with idiots online. Well, Art made a living at it at times, or at least discussing with them, right?
He did.
Renegade said, I'm pretty sure I met that guy at Float Fest, or at least a dude spirit animal. And I missed another good one here. Sean says JC still calls into George Norrie.
Yeah, on the fandom site, they have a list of, if not the episode number, at least like the number of times per year that he has called into the show, and he is still at it today. Or somebody portraying that character.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Haas says Art Bell rocked the AM waves. Listened to him for years when I worked nights. He used to cover politics, then started the paranormal stuff. Sounds like Haas was around listening to him from way back.
Nice.
But yeah, so your notes here, you put that JC was an odd duck, and he called in many times, spouting all kinds of religious viewpoints, argumentative, and talked over Art all the time. And apparently, I didn't catch this, but he used to pick fights with guests too, did he?
Yeah. So if Art was interviewing somebody and then they go to the call-in segment and JC would come through and he would just rip them a fresh one all the time over. Usually media pornography was his thing. He didn't care for people who, were in same-sex relationships. He didn't care anything that what's my word here, that the ultra conservatives don't care for. That was JC's platform. So if you were easily offended, he probably was not the guy to listen to.
So he would have been a placeholder for Joe Conservative or Joe Ultra Conservative, eh?
Yeah, and well, I mean, he was, and that was an extreme example too, because
right,
in my experience of conservatism around here, it's nothing like that. It's more like, okay, I'm not crazy about it, but whatever kind of attitude.
Yes, and it's fun to, I keep telling the same story, but the other day I went onto Facebook and somebody was talking about all the bullshit we dealt with over the last couple of years, and I thought, yeah, that's legit. And then the very next line they start talking about flat Earth, and I'm like, see, like, and you wonder why when we question things that happen on a regular basis, people call us crackpots. Anyway, that's the rest of my soapbox for tonight. So Sean Ryan said JC actually co-hosted the show with Art 3 times. See, this
no way.
You know what, Sean? Maybe we'll have to get Sean on with us some night. He knows a lot.
He knows his stuff. Yeah. We need a part 2.
Yeah. Oh, we'll do. Yeah. There's so much. So, okay. The next one is one that I picked, Kerry.
Sweet.
So this is the man who flew over Area 51.
Yeah.
Have you heard that one?
Yeah. I love this one.
Yeah. It's fun. So I just picked, I kind of have it set right where, so to set the stage for you guys, this guy's girlfriend sent a fax in because Art used to communicate via fax. I know that's crazy to think of. And she said he was trying to get a hold of him, and he's in a little Cessna. The way it sounds, it almost sounds like he built the Cessna himself or something. It's a very believable sounding call. And apparently so let's pick it up right there. Let's bring this up. And whoops, sorry, Kerry, made you disappear. And here we go.
Yes, sir. Where are you?
Well, I'm up here from Fort Worth in my little airplane. It's a long sea I built myself. It's a Bergruth hand design with the Ford Canard. I'm not sure if you know the kind. It's an experimental aircraft.
I'm not
classified that, but not anymore.
No, tell me about it. What kind of airplane is it?
Well, it's a long easy. It's got 120 horsepower like homing in it, but we had it bored and stroked and fixed it up a little bit. It usually flies around 140, 160 indicated range. And I figure I'll just go on up here and try to get into this Area 51. I'm right south of this Nevada test site, or Nellis Air Force Base.
Listen.
And I'm right outside this restricted zone.
Listen.
This baby up a little bit here. Let's do that. Let's crank this thing on up. We got some pretty good mountains here off to my west, don't you know?
All right, jump ahead a little.
Why are you doing it at night?
Because that's the best way to get in here.
But even if you manage to overfly the area,
I'm in the restricted zone. I just entered the restricted zone. I see a bunch of lights out there. Looks like some kind of a searchlight coming on.
So there. So I won't play too much just so we don't, maybe anyway. So apparently he got shot down eventually. At least that's how the story goes. Is it, Kerry?
That's how it sounds. He, at one point later in the call, he says he's got 2 fighter jets alongside him that are doing like you need to land or turn around or whatever.
The guy reminds me of Cousin Eddie, who played Cousin Eddie in
from Independence Day.
Independence Day, right?
Yeah.
He sounds like a drunk crop duster who's just out
Randy
to have
Quaid.
some fun. Randy Quaid, yes.
Yep.
So who knows? This would have been pre-Independence Day, I think. But anyway,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it was real, it was very believable. But it sounds like the guy's on an airplane radio with lots of noise in the background, and him and Art are going back and forth. And Art's like, "Why are you so stupid? You're over Area 51 at night in a homemade airplane or a home-built airplane. What are you trying to prove?" And then the guy just kind of, stuck in his ways, like, "This is what I'm going to do." And Renegade says, "Flying into restricted airspace is generally a bad idea." And from what we can tell, it sounds to me like he was dispatched at the end. Is that what they say?
Yeah, because it just cuts out. Like he kind of starts to panic, and then it's just static. And like Art tries to call him back and reconnect and can't, and it just kind of leaves you wondering.
Makes for good theater, if nothing else, right?
Yeah, and let's go with if Area 51 is a real thing, it's not like it would be reported in the news that some little aircraft was shot down in Nevada, or New Mexico, or wherever they are. So
the last clip I just played, beneath it, there is a context. You know how lots of videos have context warnings now? So it says Encyclopedia Britannica, and then it gives an article about what Area 51 actually is. So that tells you something interesting, because back in the X-Files days, and a little even pre X-Files, I was always very interested in Area 51. To me, I think of all things, that was one of the most intriguing areas I'd ever heard of,
Oh, yeah.
And Haas says Linda Howell was very popular on his shows, too. She always covered the paranormal.
She was bringing up the whole cattle mutilation thing. She was known for reporting on that.
And I listened to one not long ago. I think she traveled quite a bit, too, didn't she?
Yeah, she would be all over the world.
Yeah, I remember she was in, at least according according to the story, according to her report, she was in England checking out crop circles at the time.
Yep.
So Renegade says, "I wonder if Art ever covered the Killdozer incident." That would be interesting.
I don't know, but that's easy enough to try to search.
Well, that's what I was just thinking, because it would be, I don't know if he, we'll do some digging. If anybody has any requests for topics that Art covered for the next show, because we're going to do another one of these, I'm sure. And Sean says Linda has a podcast on YouTube every Wednesday night. I think it's called Earth Flies. Well, she might be an interesting guest to get on the show sometime. That would be fun.
I didn't know if she was still reporting.
So let's go with this next one. I'm going to bring it up here. Give me a second. This is called Sounds from Hell. Have you heard this before, Kerry?
This is on that same CD that the Mel's Hole.
I kind of figured.
Yeah. This is great, and it gives me the creeps. But yeah, I'm all about it.
So I want to preface this and Art prefaces it as well, that if weird, creepy sounding things scare you, please turn off your podcast right now and go home and talk to your mommy, because it could get a little scary for just a minute. But this is so if you've heard of this, the capped well, I guess the Russians at one time attempted to drill the world's deepest hole for some reason. It's in Siberia. And as the story goes, they open it up and they record the sounds that come out of it. This is like third-hand tape recordings. But for all of you out there who want something very entertaining, hang in there.
A clean copy of it now, and I warn you, this could scare you. Here's the email. Dear Art Bell, I just recently began listening to your radio show and could not believe it when you talked about the sounds from hell tonight. My uncle had told me this story a couple of years ago, and I didn't believe him. Like one of your listeners who discounted the story as nothing more than just a religious newspaper fabricated account. The story about the digging of the hole and the hearing of the sounds from hell is very real. It did occur in Siberia.
Earbud warning, guys.
My uncle collected videos and audio tapes and so forth on the paranormal, supernatural. He passed away fairly recently, but he would have loved your show. He let me listen to one of the audio tapes that he had on the sounds from hell in Siberia, and I copied it. You received his copy from a friend who worked at the BBC. It took me a while to find it tonight, but attached is that sound from my uncle's tapes. It's not the greatest quality, but the sounds are there. I was very hesitant to send you this, as the sound bothers me to listen to. I'd suggest that if you do play it on the program, warn listeners in advance so they may have the option of turning the radio off for 30 seconds while it plays. It has always haunted me. To those who discounted the Siberia sounds from Hell's Story, it is true, and I, for one, wish it wasn't. Rick, listening from Chicago. And so I submit now the cleaned, a better copy to you, and I warn you, what you're about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
So, I guess if a person ever pictured what hell would sound like, I think that might be it.
I'd say it's pretty accurate.
That's creepy as hell. I'm so, pardon the pun, but that is creepy. Renegade Butcher says that's just early recordings of Katy Perry played in reverse. Fair enough.
That's before they apply auto-tune. Yeah.
Yes. That was back when she was still a gospel singer. So, what do you think of that?
Oh, I mean, I remember when I put that CD in, and I probably played it in my the portable player, the Walkman version. I was, kind of still doing the church thing then, and I was like, well, that's enough of that. Like, I just kind of felt like I just nope, not gonna open that door. Still creepy. That hasn't changed. Like, it gave me chills. So
it's still creepy, even if it's something that was made. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Kerry.
Yeah. Even if it was fake, still emotional reaction has happened. Yeah.
And so that clip was 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The reason I wanted to play the entire thing was to kind of show how much of a showman Art was, because he spent 2 minutes and about 15 seconds building up a 30-second clip.
Yep.
So, Alfred Hitchcock used to say that the monster you don't see is scarier than the monster you do. And so he spent, almost 2.5 minutes building the tension. And, it was scary as hell when you listen to it. But the fact that he took all that time to put you in the right state emotionally was definitely helps when it comes to that.
Absolutely.
And to create a plausible backstory, because we all knew somebody somewhere that either had a VHS tape. You remember like Faces of Death and that kind of stuff. People would make copies of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Or, in the early days of the internet, they used to be like, of course, I had audio copies of some of the early Celebrity Jeopardy skits. Or there was that radio skit where the lady called in and she wanted to have the deer crossing moved because it was in a bad spot. There was all those early, and they'd be a recording of a recording that would get passed on. And for any Gen Zs or millennials out there, there was those things called cassette tapes that we used to dub, and they would get worse with every copy. So, and then this is, who knows how many times that was recorded and compressed and then, sent through the pipelines, and then you guys hear it again through the air. So yeah, it's cool. The mythology behind it, I enjoyed a lot. So from that, there was one story I looked for tonight that I couldn't find. And it reminded me of, it was, there was a movie in the early 2000s called Frequency, where a girl makes contact with her dad over the radio. And this story was really cool. Not too often, Art would read emails or faxes he would get from people. Usually he wanted to get people to call in live, but this was a cool story. And basically the idea was her dad was always into ham, and he passed away, and she came home and she wanted to learn how to use his ham radio gear, and she had somebody show him, and she'd gotten on, and she talked to 2 or 3 of his contacts, and they had all told them that they had talked to him that week. And of course she said, well, that's impossible. My dad's been dead for 2 or 3 weeks now. Right. And it was such a warm-hearted story, but it still had that creep value to it as well. Yeah. And if I can find that, guys, I will either I'll get a printout of it and read it myself, or I'll play some of the excerpts in the next episode we do, you know. And Renegade said the Ring just wouldn't have had the same vibe with the secondhand VHS without, I think he means without the secondhand VHS cassette element. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Haas said his annual Halloween show was awesome, made it pretty scary listening. Yes, Ghost to Ghost was just awesome.
They were great.
And yes, Haas said Art was a ham as well. He would go on the airwaves sometimes after the show. Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat. So the next one we have is Dr. Doom, or better known as Major Ed Dames. Is that right?
Yeah, Major Ed Dames.
Okay. Now this one's audio only. It's all I could find. I hope it plays properly here, but we'll bring it up, and we won't even. Yeah, here we go. Let's see.
And we can anyway. We proceed along using these protocols in a very structured manner, where to the point where we can do very accurate drawings, distances, directions, vectors of a target. We can do clay models of a person, a place, a facility, those kinds of things, an object. For instance, right now we're modeling for a federal agency the next set of bombs that the Unabomber is making to use against civilians.
Wow.
So that kind of thing. That's what my company, SciTech, is doing now.
In the research at SciTech, or in that government work you did, was there ever any research into whether the target at any point becomes aware in any way or of any change, discomfort, probing, aware in any way that he or she is a target?
If the target happens to be a natural, like somebody that's very gifted natural, and we all have this faculty. It's innate. It just has to be trained to be useful, and there was no structure or grammar, if you will, until the discovery was made. If a trained remote viewer or a natural psychic happens to be the...
All right, so this guy was a remote viewer. Apparently he used to work for the government or the CIA, something like that, Kerry?
Yeah, I can't remember if the CIA or the NSA, but one of those 3-letter agencies that spies for a living.
Yes, some kind of alphabet agency, right? So
yeah.
Sean Ryan says some guy called in, was able to tell Art the exact layout of his studio via remote viewing.
Wow.
So, that could have been literally remote viewing with a webcam, or it could have been somebody who knew, or it could have been somebody who was maybe legit at it, right? So, yeah, he said he was U.S. military trained. So here's the thing. Ed, when I dug into him quite a bit, he reminded me quite a bit of a lot of the TV evangelists that I listened to growing up, or that were in the background. Do you remember Jack Van Impe? I don't know if you do or not, but
that one doesn't
right here, I think he's probably still on TV. I don't know. But anyway, he predicted the end of the world every single week. He was constantly, the rapture is going to happen. Jesus is coming back. This, that, the other. It was all constant. It never stopped, period, ever. And, Sean says it was before webcam. So that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, he reminds me of those guys. Or there was a guy named Edgar Weisenant who wrote 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Would Happen in 1988. That didn't really, what do you want to call it? Age very well?
No, if it did, not too many people got raptured. So
no, maybe we were just so
maybe we got left behind.
Yeah, And now, and I'm not saying that the dude wasn't involved in some crazy shit. Like Renegade said, the CIA was doing some serious research into that shit, and there's tons of declassified documents showing some freaky shit, which is cool. If somebody like he goes on to talk about, well, you heard in there, the Unabomber and how they were remote viewing on him. And this episode was was recorded in December of 95, and the Unabomber was caught in April of 96. So there's only about 4 months between it, and he never had a chance to let off another bomb. But there was a bomb in 95 that put him back in the consciousness of everyone, right? So it was something, who knows, maybe they were. I mean, you know, if I was desperate as an FBI, CIA agent, I'd probably try something like that too, just to see what would happen, right?
Yeah, and remote viewing is actually at this point pretty much considered to be like a thing. Like, it's really well documented. It is a teachable skill. Like, all that is accurate. And I've actually read a number of books on the topic. I've read biographies of people who were in these programs and then in like later incarnations of it. Joe McMoneagle is one, and Art actually interviewed him. And there's another fella, David Morehouse. I can see the book on my shelf right now.
Nice.
David Morehouse, very interesting guy, very interesting book. So like it is a thing. And this is kind of where, you know, Kerry gets weird. We are able to perceive things beyond what we use our five senses for. So, and just like anything, you know, is if the military can figure that out and put it to work for their own purposes, then they will, and they did, and I'm sure that they still do, and it's probably more advanced than ever. The thing about Ed is he's mostly full of it.
That's the problem.
Yes. There's a lot of evidence that he was not nearly as high up in the program as he led people to believe, and there's been a lot of claims against him for fraud and things like that. So
he ended up his first. Yeah. So I did some more digging. Has he passed? No, is he still around?
He's still at it.
Yeah.
His website is active. Yeah.
It's called Remote RV or something RV now.
Learn RV,
because his original business, his co-founder sued him for 400 and some thousand. He lost the case, had to pay the money. His ex-wife took over the business. He started a new business and then changed it to Learn Remote Viewing. Now, of course, I have no problem with capitalism and people making money, but it is one of those things that apparently it's rather expensive to learn. Now, the proof's in the pudding when people make predictions. And he predicted the kill shot in 2011 or 2012 when everybody was scared of the Mayans. He thought there was going to be a huge coronal mass ejection that was going to basically wipe us all off the planet. Didn't happen. I guess he changed his mind and said it was coming at some point in the near future. So there's that.
He keeps pushing it out. Yep.
Yes. And I even found an old Twitter comment from Joe Rogan in 2013 about Ed. And even Joe Rogan seemed slightly not unimpressed, but didn't quite seem convinced. You know, he talked about the documentary and he's like, hey, everybody's got to check this out. And then he's like, but I'm not so sure. And if Joe Rogan says that, I'm like, okay, yeah. But an interesting dude nonetheless. And, you know, on the subreddit, he was probably one of the least liked guests on there. Everybody called him boring or dull. Like he doesn't have much of a personality, right?
Yeah, he has no affect in his voice, and he seems to. People who are ultra self-assured to me are not very interesting, and that's how he always comes across. As there's just no possible way he could be wrong, and like, well, that's boring. So
right, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And you're right, yeah, because when they 100% are either in love or believe their own shit that much, then it's like, well, okay, I guess we'll, I don't know. If there's no room for debate or comparison or learning in the conversation, then what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
Renegade says the brain is a bundle of nerves that sends and receives electrical signals. The more you learn about radio waves, the more you start to see why it's not that bizarre of an idea, but there are nuts. That's the problem. Like John Bush the other day had a good Facebook post about crypto and how crypto itself is a great technology, things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and that sort of thing. But the problem is that there is a metric shit ton of scam artists involved in the crypto space right now. And of course, whenever that happens, you know, I mean, take a guy like Alex Jones, for instance, and I'm treading lightly here because I'm sure there's lots of people out there who love the dude. You know, I'm sure Alex Jones has gotten many things right over the years. But the problem is that the things he gets wrong puts him in the limelight and everybody sees him for it, right?
Yeah.
And that paints you in modern times as a pariah, right? And I get it. So Sean Ryan says the interviews with Father Malachi Martin were awesome.
I'm glad Sean brought that up. So I've got a quick story about listening to this guy on night shift on the ambulance. So he was a priest who performed exorcisms, and they would sometimes record, I guess, audio record these exorcisms.
Right.
And I'm already like, I actually don't really care for too many horror films. I'm actually kind of a big baby when it comes to that sort of thing. But there's something about the whole demonic thing that literally, like, it scares the absolute piss out of me, because I think it's probably real. Like, there's a lot of stuff I doubt, but I think that's probably real. And I've also like been around people that gave me a terrible, terrible feeling.
Sure.
So, but anyway, one night I'm on the truck with my paramedic partner, and this guy was a little bit older than me, and he was basically like Opie from the Andy Griffith Show. Like, he was literally the most, he even looked like Ron Howard. He was the most like happy-go-lucky, like everything was nice, everything was fine. He never got irritated. He never was grumpy. He never said an ill word about any patient or staff member, which, be real, guys, like, we all bitched about everything on that truck. But anyhow, I turn on Coast to Coast, and it was probably a rerun show, because at this time Art wasn't actually on the show live anymore, but they would run on Saturdays and Sundays. They would run reruns of Art's old show, because they were better than George.
That's a bad song.
And yeah, so Dr. Martin's on there, and he's telling his story, and then they go to the part where they're playing the clips of these exorcisms, and you hear that demonic voice, the one that just makes you feel not good at all. And after about 30 seconds of that, my partner reached over and just punched the radio off, and he was like, "I'm sorry, but I can't handle any more of that." And I was like, okay, because I was kind of like, I'm going to grin and bear this. Like, this is crazy. This is freaking me out, but I'm going to listen to it. It's, 2 a.m. We're sitting downtown. It was probably like a creepy fall night anyhow. And he was like, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky was like, nope, can't do it. So
that
made an impression on me. Yeah.
And for a dude who nothing seemed to bother, was that the idea?
Yeah, he came across as like, just super, super happy-go-lucky.
Okay.
He was just kind of like, you weren't sure if he was like full of it, and that was just a facade that he put on to get through the shift. But because you ever around one of those people, it's like, there's no way they're actually that nice.
Yes.
Like Tim, you're a nice guy, and you seem to have a pretty good demeanor, but I bet you get pissed off at some shit, and I bet you've like walloped something that has a carburetor before because it wouldn't freaking start. So
I've put a hole in the wall on a couple of occasions in my life. So yeah, absolutely.
Same here. But this guy was like, is he actually that nice, or is it just an act? But at any rate, he couldn't handle demons on the radio. They were scary.
Yeah. And you know what? On the next time, it might be 2 or 3 months before we do another one, but the next time we do one, we'll get a bit of his in there. And then there was, what was her name? Was her name Harlot?
Harlot the Witch.
Yes. That was different. Yep. It wasn't as scary as I thought, but it was still very much odd. Hey?
That lady should have been, if she wasn't actually an actress calling into that show, she should have been, because she was that good.
Renegade wanted to know if I apologized to the wall, being a fellow, or being a polite Canadian. So probably said something worse than that at the time, but yeah. But yeah, she was, and she was crazy, absolutely crazy. Sean said Harlot was legit. Yeah, I think she was interviewed. Was it in other instances or something like that? I can't remember. But so there was, when you were talking about being in the ambulance, that reminded me of another ghost to ghost story. He had a guy come on there who used to deliver bodies to the morgue or take them to the funeral home from the morgue. And the one story he told, I mean, if the guy was full of shit, I don't know. But he basically talked about how, I don't know what's going on. I have a hardwired connection here, and I still sometimes get a Wi-Fi signal. So something's going on. So anyway, guys, I apologize. It wasn't planned. It was not the Area 51 call-in outage, but I think it might have been aliens, or CSIS is the Canadian version of the FBI and CIA up here. So I think it was maybe them trying to get us. Martinson family said the GD libtards don't want us to get the message out. So there you go. So I appreciate that. All right. So the last one we're going to cover, guys, is Madman Markham. And interesting dude. Hey, Kerry?
Yeah, this guy was quite the trip to listen to.
I have anyway. So I'll fill you in a little bit on his background afterwards. Rachel said Tim beat the demons trying to stop the show. So far, we're good. If it cuts out, guys, I apologize. Weather's good here, so let's play it. Hang on, I'll bring this up. And let's have fun with it.
A secret location somewhere in the country and say, Mike, welcome to Midnight in the Desert.
Yeah, it's been a long time, Art.
Been a long time. 20 years ago, right? The first interview, and then 18 years ago?
Yep, something like that.
Something like that. All right. Gee, Mike, it's hard to know where to begin with you. Even back then, it was hard. You connected, I think, with us. Probably we were doing an open lines thing on time travel. Is that how we got together?
It's been so long, I hardly remember.
That was probably it.
If I remember right, somebody faxed you a newspaper article, and then you basically hunted me down. So
that's right. I hunted you down like a dog. Okay. So at that moment when I found you, Mike, and I do, I use the term madman affectionately, right?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't bother me any. So
it's kind of stuck though, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, well earned, really. When I found you at that moment, you were experimenting, the beginnings of experimental time travel, and you sort of laid it out for me. So if you can remember how you began, tell us.
Well, way back when, basically, I just set out to make a fancy Jacob's ladder. So basically, two metal rods, spark going up the high voltage spark going up the middle. That's basically like the old Frankenstein movies or whatever.
Right. That was the first step, and if I recall correctly, you then modified it with lasers to.
Yeah, basically.
All right. So that was him. I don't want to go too long into the show with him rattling on, but the idea was he built a Jacob's ladder, which is basically two metal poles running a big transformer at the bottom. And when you see it, it looks like the old Frankenstein thing where these electrical pulses kind of go up and then out at the top. Story goes that he took a sheet metal screw for whatever reason, threw it into those electrical pulses. It disappeared and then reappeared 3 to 4 seconds later across the room. Now, I mean, take with it what you will, but he, for whatever reason, decided that he had invented time travel at that moment. So he tried to turn the power up a little more. It burned up. So he thought, well, what do we need to do? I'm a broke college student. So him and his buddies went and stole a bunch of 300-pound transformers from a local power yard, built one. When they fired it up, apparently, the way the story goes, that it put out the entire power in his whole town. The sheriff showed up because some loud noise at his place, discovered the stolen property, and he spent some time in jail. And then, as the story goes, there was it doesn't seem plausible considering he was on Art's show a couple of times, 20 years apart, but some people say he disappeared in 1997 for a long time. And then there was a story that he ended up dead in the 1930s with a cell phone next to him. Take that for what you will. But the more I dug, I found him recently, as recent as February of this year, posting in an online forum, talking about how he was getting ready to build another time machine.
Yep, I found that same post and a Facebook account too. Which, could belong to anybody, but it was there. Same thing. He was basically running a GoFundMe.
Right. So, which probably would have been very advantageous back in the day when he was doing it. Because he could have built a bigger
Maybe
time
he wouldn't
machine.
have to steal. Yeah.
So what'd you think of him?
I mean, time travel has always been fascinating to me. It was always my favorite topic on like the Star Trek shows and stuff like that. And it really bends your brain, So he was interesting. And one of the things that made it sound more legit was, I can't remember if it was the first or the second time that he called into Art, but when they went to people calling in to talk to him, the arresting officer called in.
Really?
I'll have to see if I can find that episode and send it to you, because he calls in and you can tell that Markham is like that. If it was pre-planned, man, they really pulled it off, because he was kind of like, because he was young, like he was 21, and he was really weirded out by the fact that the officer called in, and the officer was very nice and everything, but he corroborated everything that had been said up to that point. So that was kind of one of those kind of confirmation moments of, maybe this guy did something. I don't know if he time traveled, but he did something pretty bizarre.
I think in my mind, I kind of put him in the same category as Ed Dames or the harlot we talked about earlier. Whether take them or leave them, they 100% believed in what they said. They weren't, those three at least weren't actors. They weren't putting on a show. They 100% believed in what they did. And my brother-in-law, he just come on. He said, if he could time travel, he said, why didn't he go back in time and win lotto? So here's the thing, and this is what made me chuckle. Madman said that he, for whatever reason, he could only time travel into the future slightly, or at least that's what he planned. Now, when I read that, I was reminded, do you remember Mad TV in the 90s, Kerry?
I watched a little bit, yeah.
I loved it. I was a huge Mad TV fan, way more than Saturday Night Live. And they did a skit in there way back in the day where the scientist called in the news, and he's like, I have invented a time machine. He said, I can only go in the future for about 8 hours at a time. He said, come into my lab and I'll show you what I have. And they go in there and he pulls the curtain back and it's a bed. So it reminded me of that when he said I can only go into the future. So yeah. It was fun. I love it. I mean, again, when we talk about all of the people who were on here, most weren't disingenuous. And the cool thing was, on some of the Ghost to Ghost episodes, were if Art suspected that it was a kid or a young guy making up a story, having a laugh at his expense, he would cut them off quick and just be gone, because whatever he covered, he wanted it to be covered seriously and honestly. Earnestly, maybe would be the right term. Hey?
Yeah, for sure. He had a quick hand for the eject button, especially since he didn't screen for most of that time. And I remember especially one thing that made an impression on me when they would do the New Year's Eve prediction shows, where audience members would just call in, but Art had rules after some incidents. He said, no, do not predict the death of any head of state of any country, because when people have done that before, he said, people in black suits show up at my house knocking on the door wanting to know how I know about such and such person is allegedly going to be assassinated. So he said, don't talk about celebrity death, political death, anything like that. Everything else was a free for all, and those New Year's Eve shows are great.
So it just reminded me of something here. I just read this article the other day, and I'm going to see. Whoops, we got some up there. So recently, there was a guy who has run an Area 51 website since the mid 90s. It may even predate back to like the BBS days. I'm not sure. And his house was recently raided by men in black suits without giving him any reason for it. he suspects it may have been some sort of new airplane that he got pictures of and posted on the internet. But he's basically doing a GoFundMe because they took all his gear and now he's up a creek. And he talked to a lawyer and he's like, if you ever get it back, the computers will be out of date by the time you get them.
Wow.
I'll bring up, I'll find the story some night and we'll discuss it. But so yeah, Renegade just said, did Tim accidentally just queue up his OnlyFans audio track? No, unfortunately it was a, what do you call it? A commercial for StreamYard. They have the most pornyish soundtrack you're ever going to get. So,
oh man.
So what do you think? Oh, go ahead, Kerry.
Yeah, I was just going to mention how, Art's show, it launched the careers of a lot of other people who have continued in radio, podcast format. Apparently Linda Moulton Howe is one, and I didn't know she was still at it, so I'm definitely going to see what she's up to these days. But Richard Hoagland, which was known for his space reporting and the stuff with Mars, he has his own show called The Other Side of Midnight. I don't know if it's on like terrestrial radio or if it's internet based at this point. Whitley Strieber still does Dreamland.
Right.
And there's a few more out there. So, just much in the way where, you took Spirko's concept and you've turned it into your own thing and so many people have. So, in a lot of ways, like his work lives on in that format, which is pretty nice.
That's cool. I don't think I could sum it up any better than that. We've talked about it over the years, but lately I've been thinking about how much content is out there and how much, we've basically for the last 10 to 12 decades, let's say the last 100 years, have been a content creation society, whether it's radio, TV, books, movie, music. And if all of content stopped being created tomorrow, there would still be more than enough content out there to consume for the rest of 100 lifetimes, and you still wouldn't hear it all.
Mm-hmm. By far.
But we all still create because there's a need for it, there's a hunger for it, and it seems to be in a human's nature to create for whatever reason that is. And I think that when you're talking about art, and it would be kind of neat to go, you go all the way back to where he started in, I think it was in Korea in the 60s or 70s. Mm-hmm. And he claimed way back then that he set the Guinness Book of World Records for being on the air for the longest time. But you think about where he started and where he ended up in Pahrump, Nevada in 2018, and how many people he touched over all those years, and how many creators or radio hosts or whatever all exist now simply because he decided to get on a microphone and start hollering way back in the day. Hey.
Yeah. And people just thought it was cool. And he set a heck of an example. And when you pull up those old YouTube videos, every single comment is positive. Everyone is praising him. Every one of them is saying like rest in peace and all that kind of stuff. And, I was stunned when he passed away. And, because even though he was sort of mostly officially retired at that point, I don't think he was really doing any radio or internet, but it was, I'm not usually one of these types that's like bothered by like celebrity death or whatever, but that was a little bit of a gut punch because he was just such a unique voice in that field. There's not going to be anybody else like him, and that's all right.
True story. I mean, you look at George Noory, and I haven't listened to the man, so I don't want to judge him, but I can share what I've heard from other people, and it sounds like he's maybe a pale imitation to some extent, and there. So Renegade says Art was a showman, but he was always 100% a class act, mm-hmm. And even the small little, I don't know, controversies that followed him, they just were what they were. You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
And Art, I love it. You see all the old time. I love anytime you see a picture, almost always it's an old radio gear and he's got his damn cigarette in his mouth.
A cigarette. Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm sure, well, it seems like the cigarettes are what killed him eventually, but he still lived to, his early 70s, which isn't as bad as what it could have been. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah. And he had remarried after his wife had passed away, and he had a daughter. He's got several kids, actually. Had a few wives too, but
yeah.
Hey, the man lived a full life, and I'm not going to pass judgment on anybody who followed their dream and made the kind of impact that he did. He seemed to have a good heart, and to kind of have his heart in the right spot. So I admired that.
One more thought I have, and it's something I've been dealing with a lot lately. And I've come to the conclusion that in life, if you want to be great at something, you have to commit to that one thing, and you have to commit to it for a lifetime. Because if you want to do a whole bunch of things, that's fine. But if you want to be remembered for something you do, you have to be passionate, committed, and almost obsessed with it. And, Art left a legacy behind. I think it would be a lot of fun to put either a documentary or a biography together on the man. But he is an exact example of committing yourself, your entire adult life to something, and leaving a footprint behind that'll be remembered, hopefully for decades, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as we have digital media, he's going to keep influencing new generations, and that word, his influence is just going to keep kind of dispersing through society.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Brown, we've been an hour and a half. So, anybody want to check up with you? Where do they find you, brother?
StrongRootsResources.com is the website, and StrongRootsResources@gmail.com if you want to shoot me an email. I am happily helping a number of people with some edible landscape and homestead design, and and some of them not so much. No, everybody's great. I've only got one person who's wearing me out right now. She just has a lot of questions, and that's okay because she hired me to answer her questions.
Perfect.
But that's how they can find me.
Well, thank you, Kerry. Kerry's going to be helping me with, a good buddy of ours, Brian Alexovich from the Lots Project as well. But my wife and I just bought 10 acres down in Tennessee, and Kerry's going to help us build our off-grid paradise down there. So I'm quite excited about that. And just wanted to say thank you. The new name I've seen in here a lot tonight was Sean Ryan. I really appreciate you. Just warning, this show's all over the place, preparedness, home maintenance, living off the grid, all kinds of cool things. So it's good to have you. I appreciate it. Always love seeing new faces in here. And it's fun, isn't it, Kerry, doing some of these off the wall episodes where we can just kind of dig deep into something?
Oh yeah. It's a great format. I'm all about it.
And last time I had Kerry on, we talked about the Ferengi rules of acquisition. So, geez, you just never know what we're going to talk about. Hey,
nope. We're going to nerd out on something. That's for sure.
Appreciate it. Well, folks, we thank you for coming in once again. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, keep looking at the skies.